Hello, this is an overview video for an animation of a frog I've been working on. I started this idea by sketching out a frog. I wanted to try and learn some 2D animation. I haven't really done much in the way of 2D animation before. I love drawing and it's always been something I wanted to try, so I thought it was time to have a go. I also wanted to try out this software I'd heard of called Animation Paper, which is still in beta, but it's very functional and I found it really easy to use. So I just did a quick frame by frame test in it. I wasn't decided on the background for this at all, but I thought maybe some lily pads would be a nice thing to do. So this is me just sketching out some very basic early lily pads. I eventually scrapped the lily pads and just exported the frames of the frog. I cleaned the lines up using Clip Studio. I could have used Krita or any other program to do this, so I was just cleaning up all the lines for every frame of the frog that I'd exported. I imported these into Krita. I just wanted to test the animation sequence in Krita. So you can convert layers to an animation group and then you can play it on the timeline. It's quite useful if you want to do painting in Krita on animation frames. The next thing I did was I put my image into Blender and I used an add-on I've had called Perspective Plotter, which is based on something called F-Spy, which lets you map the perspective of an image in Blender and then build the scene based on the correct perspective for that image. So I did this to add the lily pads and make sure they were in the right perspective. I also found a nice flower on Sketchfab, so it was this one by this artist. I then cleaned up the lines for all of these shapes and made them separate so that I could use them with transparency masks when I was painting. I started off the painting using Rebel 8. So I was just blocking in the colours and blending them and trying to figure out the overall colour scheme. Then I started planning for if I was going to move the lily pads in the animation, so I needed to extend them outside the borders of the image. I was using transparency masks. It got a little bit cumbersome in Rebel, so I decided to continue in Krita. Rebel 8 is quite taxing on my computer, and Krita manages lots of layers a lot better. So I put everything into Krita. I'd exported a PSD file from Rebel 8 and then prepared it. Then I just continued painting in Krita. So I was just trying lots of different layer modes and just compositing the layers, like blocking the basic things together. I started thinking about putting some details into the lilies here. I also messed a little bit with Gimmick, which is like a filter effect creator that you've got installed with Krita. It's got some nice distortion effects and things. I was playing with that to see if I could get some nice effects on the water. So I was just playing with the different filters to see what effects I could get there. I ran the water through a program I've got called Dynamic Auto Painter, which is a program that doesn't use AI. It just maps brushstrokes onto an image using the values and things. It's been around for a very long time. It's not useful for everything. I don't use it very often at all, but I quite liked the effect it gave with this water. So in Krita I just kept adding more details and working on the different elements of the painting, playing with different textures and different colours. Once I've decided on a direction for the colour and I'm fairly confident with it, I'll work more details into different areas. I worked into the lily. I just wanted to try and make it look a bit more like an actual lily flower, so I was working with some reference I'd found from Pixabay. Pexels is also a good source for reference images if you need to know what something looks like. So I didn't want it to look like the 3D model that I'd used initially. I added a lot more details and colours and things here. It can be quite a painful process sometimes, but I just kept working at it and kept blending and kept trying different layer effects until I was fairly confident that I was going in the right direction. So this is the reflection for the lily. The lily was starting to look a bit better at this stage, so I was just adding more shadows and light here. So at this stage I thought the lily looked okay. The focus is the frog. I thought that the lily looked detailed enough here. So I began work on texturing the lily pads, just adding more details and textures. Then I added a bit more detail to the frog because that was the main focal point. I wanted to add a displacement animation effect to the water and the reflection, so I decided on doing this with Blender. So this is just a displaced image mesh. As I finished each layer for the painting, I would test it in Moho to see how it was going to all work together. I also had a little go with a new version of Ebsynth. I'm going to dedicate more time to use this in a future video. I need to figure out a project to use it with. For this particular use, I didn't think it was too useful because I needed to mask areas and have more control. It was promising though. Thought it was useful to give a general idea of how this could look on a rendered version of the frog. I was also quite impressed with how well it synthesized just the line drawing animation to a rendered version of the frog. Because of the distortion on the feet, I was trying to cut them out and thought maybe I could use it. Eventually I decided it would be better just to paint the frames in Krita one by one. Here I am in Krita and I was trying to figure out how to use the 2D animation to do that. It's actually a really powerful workflow. There's quite a few really experienced animators that use Krita. Then I composited the layers in Moho. I wanted the frog to move with the lily pads. I wasn't quite getting that to work here. So here I've got it working and I've put the frog layers in a group. So that worked a lot better. I decided that the water needed improvement though because of the displacement. It's not filling the frame. So I redid that in Blender. Another thing I did was I made a tiling pattern for the clouds that I wanted to reflect in the water. Then I animated them using Expressive Animator, which is a nice little program I've got for just animating. You can export SVG, Lottie, video, image and sequences from this program, so it is quite useful. It's also quite easy to use. One thing I do like about it is that you've got snapping options. Aligning the cloud image was very easy for this. It's a bit like having a motion graphic version of Affinity. So then I put that pattern into Blender so that I could render the frames in the right perspective for the scene. And then I went into my water displacement scene. I'd resized it so that it will go beyond the bounds of the camera so I don't get that problem I was getting. And then I had to figure out how to overlay the clouds onto the water, so I'd added a mixed shader node in the shader for this. So then I rendered all of those images from Blender and then I composited them into Moho. The thing I did want to do though was just add a little leaf floating, so I looked at my reference here. So these are all from Pexels. There might be some from Pixabay as well. I just wanted to look at this little leaf here. So this was my template for the leaf. So I just painted the leaf there. Then I put that into Moho and animated it. Then I wanted to do the ripples, but I wanted to paint them rather than just having black lines. I did that frame by frame in Krita. I wanted to make it so that they faded as the animation progressed. I found out there was a feature in Krita animation curves where you can add I'm not sure what the thing it's called, but you just add a little node here, and by dragging it up or down it affects the opacity of the layer for that particular frame. I believe there's also transform masks you can have in Krita to make some tweening animations, but I haven't tried that yet. So as I go to the start of the animation, the opacity is getting stronger here. So as the ripples go out, they fade. So with all of the layers done, I composited that in Moho, and I was happy with the result. So that's basically how I did this animation. I think this project was a good one to do. It was a little bit frustrating at times, but I learned a lot from doing it, and I'd quite like to make some more. Thanks for watching. I hope that was interesting.